Ready to go!
Alrighty, ladies and gents, welcome to another interesting video, this one that I've got in store for you today. Last night I was just sitting there doing some thinking and I wrote down a whole heap of notes. I was getting kind of deep and meaningful on arm wrestling. And here are my notes, and what I'm translating all this into is what I'm going to call the story of arm wrestling. And I want to run through it with you guys, so without further ado, let's open the classroom and talk about the story of arm wrestling. Alrighty guys, so we are going to start this story off at the beginning, naturally, at the top of the tree, at the top of the mountain, and we're going to start it with the story of Rise. Now the story of Rise we all know to be relevant to the wrist, the hand and wrist, the ability to keep up the hand and wrist, knuckles pointing to the sky during the setup of an arm wrestle. Now, only two things can happen in the battle of Rise. You can either win the battle or lose the battle. Now, depending on what two things occur, which one of those two things occur for you, will dictate to you the pathway or the story of arm wrestling as it will be for that match. Now, of course, we want to win the Rise. What does winning the Rise give you? It gives you a sense of control. It gives you a choice, and it gives you, first of all, greater back pressure. You are going to have better access to the use of your bicep if you win the wrist Rise. The other thing that you are now going to have the choice of is between supination and pronation. Supination on this side, pronation on that side. You have these choices because you won the wrist Rise. Okay, for the person who didn't win the wrist Rise, they lost over here. They are forced to only have the option of dragging or intensely committing their shoulder. Intense shoulder. Now, the intense shoulder commitment is really just going to put you into a do or die situation where the dragging is going to be very much focused on wrist flexion, i.e. cupping. Wrist flexion or cupping. All right, back to this page in the story. Now, if you choose supination, this is going to lead to a high hook. If you choose pronation, it's going to lead to a top roll. Now, of course, you could win the match from here. You could lose the match from here. Any one of these spots, you could win or lose the match. Now, if you are, say, you've committed to a high hook and the top roll, keep in mind that you can, because you won the Rise, interchange between the two. Often we see that, and that's what we call the can opener. The interchangeable transition from a high hook to a top roll, known as the can opener. Obviously made famous by Devin Larratt. And Brendan Lemon Mulvihill tries to do it too. But anyway, it won't work when he does it. Okay, from here, if you are, let's say, committed to a high hook, and let's say you win. If you win, the path to winning from here would be because your opponent gasses on all of their fundamentals. Gasses, fundamentals. And this, my friends, the high hook, is where it leads to my favorite way of victory, being your opponent pins themselves. Okay. If you are going down the victory path from the top roll, it's unlikely that your opponent's going to pin themselves. It's more likely that your opponent's side pressure will gas. So opponent's side pressure gasses, and you get access to a shoulder roll. Now the shoulder roll is where you've still taken their wrist, you've got your wrist bent, i.e. wrist flexion, and cupping is secure now, and because their side pressure is gone, you can make the transition and finish with the shoulder press for victory. But of course, as I mentioned, victory isn't always guaranteed from the high hook or the top roll. If you were to lose on either of those two, a different story comes about. Okay, so if you're going to lose from a high hook position, it's usually because your bicep and shoulder is starting to gas. So if your bicep gasses or your shoulder gasses, you're in trouble basically with the high hook. And your opponent's side pressure is probably sufficient. Okay, if you're going to lose from the top roll, there is one more option really before you are totally gone, and that is the King's Move. The King's Move, okay, the last ditch hope of the top roll, a pronation and wrist rise essential move. The last line of defense. Your biceps gone, your shoulders gone. You are living solely on your ability to keep pronation and wrist rise. Lose that and you're out with defeat. Win that and you can get back all the fundamentals once again. Now, this was just a couple of options from winning wrist rise and using, I guess, what we call back pressure. There is, of course, the winning of the wrist rise and the commitment forward, which we'll talk about briefly. Shoulder forward after winning the wrist rise. Now, if you win the wrist rise and choose to go shoulder forward, it's again a decisive move where you're going for the press. From there, you either have sufficient tricep power or you don't, and if you don't, you land in a hook on hook scenario and go from there. But let's go over to this side of the story. Okay, so for the people who didn't win the wrist rise, they are forced into only really a couple of options. They don't have the ability to achieve a high hook. They don't have the ability to really achieve a top roll. They are forced to drag and use their wrist flexion or cupping to really be in the fight. You could dad move from here. There's a few different things you could do. Or you could commit to a flop press. Again, a big all out or nothing. So you've got dad move. You've got flop press. As a few options as to what you can actually do. But more realistically than not is back pressure and wrist flexion. Now, if when you use back pressure and wrist flexion, let's say you win that battle. If you do win that battle, you tend to regain your pronation and you get a greater access to your side. Access to side pressure. Okay, if you lose that battle of drag and pronation, you're really stuck. Now you've only got the dead wrist press and complete shoulder commitment as your option to stay in the match. Okay. Of course you can win from here. It's not to say you're out. You can win from there still with the dead wrist and shoulder commitment, a la Jerry Cadorette style defense. If you go on and lose from there, it would be because your shoulder gasses. Your shoulder gasses and defeat is inevitable. Okay, if you go and win from there, it's because your opponent's bicep gasses. And ultimately, their bicep gasses before your shoulder, and you get the sweet, sweet taste of victory. But let's get back over to this side where you've won the battle of drag and wrist flexion. So after the goes happen, even though you didn't have the wrist rise, you've won the battle of back pressure because your wrist flexion and drag is better than your opponent's back pressure and or pronation or supination. So from here, what are your options? Where are you left to choose to go? All right, normally, if you just continue to dominate on that, what happens is you are going to bleed your opponent's rotation. So your opponent is going to get turned palm up, which will usually allow you down pressure in a hook fashion. Down pressure hook. And you'll probably You get the sweet, sweet taste of victory right there. If, however, we're running out of room, but if, however, you lose from here, even though you won the back pressure game, let's say from here the battle is becoming difficult. What's probably happening is your wrist flexion, i.e. your cupping, is starting to gas. Wrist flexion is gassing. Now, once your wrist flexion is gassing, you, my friend, are in trouble because you no longer have access to back pressure. You no longer have access to dragging pressure. You, my friend, are left only now with Todd Hutchins' side pressure. And unless you've trained ugly, you are going to lose. But of course, you still can win from there. People like Frodo Hoagland can do it. Obviously, Todd Hutchins can do it. So don't give up. Fight on. But be prepared to end up in a Todd Hutchins style side pressure match if this is where you have been forced. Now, let me think. Have we covered most of it? Let me refer to my notes one more time. I think that's pretty good. All right. Some other points that I wanted to cover is, now that we've outlined the basic shape of where a match can go, is to talk about the overall objective of arm wrestling and how we categorize the actual goal of winning. The objective of arm wrestling, when broken down a little deeper than simply winning and losing, is to have more finishing power than your opponent has stopping power. So you need more, we got finishing power versus stopping power. These two things really are different. You can use some finishing power to achieve a stop. You can use stopping power continuously and achieve someone pinning themselves. However, generally speaking, they are two very different feelings within the body. Finishing power, offensive; stopping power, defensive. And just because you have more finishing power than your opponent doesn't mean you're going to win. Same story, just because you have more stopping power than your opponent doesn't mean you're going to win. Now, when a match occurs, using one of the shapes from the story before, okay, there is a third and mysterious component called access to power on one side, and also ability to disengage opponent power on the other side. These two things, again, are totally different. These are obviously within the realm of hand strength and finger strength and wrist strength. All of these things, and even a little bit of back pressure. Generally speaking, guys, side pressure and down pressure are finishing powers. Stopping powers can be side pressure, can be back pressure, can be the hand pressures as well. But when we talk about these things here, about the ability to increase your own access to your own power, or the ability to disengage your opponent's power, we're referring to the hand and wrist. Think things like wrist flexion, pronation, supination, and wrist rise. These things here are really what will determine it. Now that we understand finishing power and stopping power are two different things, and accessing and the ability to access your own power and the ability to disengage your opponent's power are different things, that's where we get to designing the perfect arm wrestler. Now the question is, if this was a video game, designing the perfect arm wrestler, what would you do? It's a good question. And in fact, I think the answer to this can never be, there really can't be an answer because it's always opponent specific. It is dependent upon who you are facing next as to what you would need. But let's say you only had 10 points to allocate. The things you can allocate them to, let's say we've got the finishing powers with the subsections of side pressure being the most significant, side pressure, down pressure being the next most significant. I'm writing significant instead of the word pressure. We've got the stopping powers. Again, side pressure, back pressure, and then we've got the access and denial strengths, wrist flexion, pronation, rise, we can even call it chop, there's a few, supination. The question becomes, if you only had 10 points to spend, how much would you put in here versus how much in here and versus in here? To evenly spread your points would make you an all-round arm wrestler, for sure. But let's say to go all in on finishing power makes you a very offensive, almost Todd Hutchins side pressure puller. He has a lot of side. He can stop, he can finish. But can he deny or create access to more strength? Unlikely. Compared to the Devon Larratt style arm wrestler, heaps in the access and denial range, plenty in the stopping, but not so much in the offensive finishing power. Again, it creates a different shape. Guys, here's the thing. Guys. There is no right answer, but the more aware you are of these different ways to utilize strengths and these different ways to train and prepare yourself, the better you can become for your next opponent. If you don't know your next opponent, i.e. it's a tournament, then it's a little trickier because you've just got to go kind of all in and you've got to know yourself. Are you a Devon Larratt style? Are you a Todd Hutchins? Are you the perfect combination of everything and a John Brzenk style? There's lots of different styles, but the more you understand these things, guys, the better you can target and process your training to really specifically give you the gains you need. Anyway, that was my thoughts last night. I don't know if you followed that, if it made sense, if you agreed, if you disagreed, whatever. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. And yeah, the story of arm wrestling. There we have it.
Yes, that's a man!